Hello, UWSP. This is Alex Myers with NRES 478. And for the topic of this podcast that I'm trying to get out there, it's actually about a common problem that I sometimes don't see addressed enough despite the prevalence of it, and that is the presence of buckthorn. This is a very invasive plant. Wreaks havoc on our local Schmeekley Reserve. I've personally seen it back home in Illinois. It truly seems to be everywhere. People seem to talk about it briefly, but then nothing's ever done about it. And so the purpose of this podcast is actually to bring on some experienced students here on campus, as well as a fellow ornithologist and alumni at UWSP, to really highlight the impacts that this plant has and try and maybe encourage some of you listeners to not just overlook it. Like, I don't know about you guys, if I've ever been hiking, like, oh dang, that's buckthorn, and I move on. And really, I want to change that mindset, and I'm hoping it brings it to all of you guys to change your mindset as well. So to begin, I actually have three members of the UWSP Herpetology Society, the former president, their current event coordinator, and their current senior education officer, as well as we are very fortunate enough to be in the company of a UWSP alumni, specifically an ornithologist who has some tidbits to share on buckthorn with the native species of bird as well. But before we bring them on and let them have their discussion, I'd like them to introduce themselves. So if you guys want to go in order.
Hi, my name's Colton Lemke. I am the Senior Ed Coordinator for the Herpetology Society.
And hello, my name is Grant, and I am the former president of UWSP Herpetology Society.
Hello, I am Danny Snyder. I am the Vice President and Event Coordinator for the Herp Society.
So, like I said, thank you guys for coming out here. I really appreciate it. One of the things that I just wanted to ask right off the bat is, especially, in your case, Danny, being the event coordinator, when you're bringing students through Schmeekley and you're showing them the beautiful menagerie of native herpetofauna that we have right here on campus, but we've got all that buckthorn, like, what comes to your mind? Or, like, what are some things that you guys want to address? And, other herpetology members, feel free to just chime in and take it off.
Yeah, well, I know it's always, once you start learning about what buckthorn looks like, you kind of just can't help but see it, like, everywhere. And, like, this goes with a lot of invasive species. One thing I would definitely say as a somewhat of a positive is that in Schmeekley in particular, they do, they have that full-time, basically, student crew that does do a lot of work with getting rid of buckthorn. So, like, I know a lot of, like, near the Chilla Woodlot, through a lot of it, you don't see a lot, but then you, like, reach up towards the northern part, the streets, and you just get a big clump. So, but yeah, it's always, a little sad to see buckthorn, and it's definitely in Schmeekley. It kind of, like, even the deer sometimes eat it. Like, that might have more to do with the deer than the buckthorn. But
if only they ate all of it, right?
Right. But that's one thing about buckthorn is that normally deer don't forage it very much. They'll really go for more native plants.
The thing about buckthorn is that it's an invasive species from Europe and Asia, so many of its own native predators you can't really find here in America. So you're not going to see a whole lot of insects or bugs or even native ungulates like deer grazing on it, because it's just not a plant that they evolved to deal with. So that really just leads it to grow unchecked with no proper population control.
Yeah, and I think, and it can also kind of, like, more invasive bugs can use it as, like, a base almost, because I know I've done some work cutting down buckthorn in, like, the Chicago area, and you'll see a lot of leafhoppers. I don't know if you've had that experience, Grant, too, but, like, there's definitely some certain, like, insect, groups that I do see more on buckthorn than elsewhere, but that's just, I don't know a lot about that in particular, but that's just something I've observed, I guess.
So for like some of the novice people tuning in, you say once you notice buckthorn, you can't unnotice it. Could you just describe maybe some of the prominent features that this plant possesses and how somebody who's wanting to get more involved in identifying it and spreading awareness about it would be able to describe it to somebody per se?
So there's multiple different species of buckthorn. Some of the most common in Wisconsin are the common buckthorn and the glossy buckthorn. They both have rather like rounded leaves. They tend to be one of the ways to tell between glossy and common is the glossy buckthorn tends to be more green, more glossy, and they're both obviously green as leaves, but they have like light serrations usually.
Would you guys say that some people referring to it like a thinner tag alder is pretty similar?
Yeah, I'd say so. And the venation, I don't know exactly how I describe it, but it's somewhat
like opposite venation.
Oh, that's important. It's not the venation that's opposite, but the leaf arrangement. The leaf arrangement is alternate. So that's something. There's not many there's not that many shrubs or trees, especially shrubs in Wisconsin, I think, that have this alternate leaf arrangement. So that's one of the key ways to identify buckthorn.
In the inner bark too, like if you're ever to cut off or saw off like a little bit of section, it's gonna have really orangey bark
on the inside, and that's a really good key way to identify
the
it.
cambium or whatever.
Cool.
And I would like to add that being a student previously in plant tax, and like this, obviously you guys highlighted a lot of the special features of how to identify like native buckthorn versus invasive buckthorn. And after taking that class, I've learned how to like look at those certain characteristics of plants and know what I am IDing correctly, or to at least to a certain extent, because obviously before that I wouldn't never have looked at buckthorn anyway. I was just like seeing it as just a plant, but obviously after being educated, and that's a very important aspect, is doing research and even taking a class like dendrology or plant tax helps you ID those characteristics like venation and leaf arrangement, leaf shape and size, and like, is it a woody plant, is it a herbaceous plant? Like, obviously there's many things that you can look at to help you become like a Sherlock Holmes in nature. And that's basically the datum of what I have to add to the conversation.
Excellent, guys. It really sounds like, just your work, obviously, through the Herpetology Society, but being able to apply that into like the field, like this is a plant, and you're trying to understand it for the sake of, I'd imagine protecting your native herpetofauna species we have right here.
And plants are cool.
Yeah, plants are definitely cool,
but
invasive plants are not cool. But it's cool, being able, as Colton highlighted, you're not only going out and experiencing it firsthand, but you're taking classwork to make identifying it easier.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you guys highlighting that. However, I realize we got to bring on our fellow alumni and our ornithologist here. We're joined as well by Mr. Quinn Fulmore. And if you'd like to highlight sort of your professional experience, working with buckthorn, which I understand you possess some, and how it ties to like the native bird species and how they may affect the buckthorn, from what I understand, let us have it. Thank you again.
All right, thank you, Alex. Now, the species of buckthorn I have worked with primarily is actually the common buckthorn, which is a lot more common in Illinois than up here, it appears. But nonetheless, same family, just as destructive, if not more. Common buckthorn, in many areas of Illinois, it just forms like these giant green walls of impenetrable foliage that nothing can really get through, unless you're like willing to tear up your shirt and
You're willing to
pull it apart yourself.
Crawl maybe.
But the thing you find in these pure buckthorn groves is it's really the only thing there. Like because we were cutting a lot of it away, and once you get rid of that buckthorn, there's really nothing left under there. It just chokes out all the plants.
Yeah.
So, when you're looking at a buckthorn stand versus like a mixed native stand, you'll notice a great difference in avian biodiversity. In a buckthorn stand, European starlings, one of their favorite snacks, of course, is the buckthorn berry. So, you have you have two natives of Europe that are plopped over here in an unfamiliar landscape, and one of them just so happens to feed on the other one in their native range. So, in the fall a lot you see these massive clouds of starlings descending on the buckthorn groves, eating all of their berries, and then departing. And what you may not realize is that the buckthorn berry is actually a natural laxative to birds.
No way.
They'll fly a short distance away, maybe a couple miles tops, and then they let loose. And next spring you're gonna have new buckthorns growing up.
So quite literally, not as only addressing buckthorn as an invasive species, but would you say that part of the reason it's so successful in spreading is because of its almost codependence on this other established invasive species?
I would say so. That's really the only bird I ever see actually seek out buckthorn is the European starling. I mean, I've seen cardinals and robins nibble on it, but it's definitely not their first pick. So
if it's the only option, I do think like robins will eat. They will eat it, but I mean I think that birds do definitely play a big role in spreading it as well.
You notice that a lot when you're looking at a chain link fence or underneath a phone wire, because you'll see all the little buckthorn seedlings are growing right at the base of it, because the birds land up there and then they make their deposit and fall straight down, and then you got the plants growing out there. And left unchecked, you end up with a massive line of buckthorn underneath a fence or a power line.
Truly unfortunate, unfortunately. So, as we approach, like I said, our roughly our 15-minute mark, I want to just get sort of feel free to shout them out, or it's clear your guys' passions are on obviously not just identifying the buckthorn, but then trying to share why it's destructive to the local ecosystem. What would be your guys' best advice as far as, again, somebody who's new to the scene? How could they reach out? How could they take action, become inspired, and to try and, again, bring more awareness?
Yeah, so I think there's actually a lot of opportunities to go out and cut down buckthorn. I think really looking at your local, in local forest preserves, there's almost always going to be some kind of a volunteer group that is going to be an organized group of usually very dedicated individuals that just on their spare time without any pay just choose to go out there and remove invasive species, in particular buckthorn, but honeysuckle, other bad invasives.
Yeah, of
and
course.
I know in Schmeekely there's the Friends of Schmeekely and the SEI, or the Students for Ecological, or Society for Ecological Restoration, do work days, and where you can just go out and cut down buckthorn and do other habitat restoration. And there's also a fair bit of money too that does go into controlling invasive species, including buckthorn. If anyone else has anything to say.
Yeah, there are definitely positions. So I worked with a few years ago, back in high school, I worked with the SCA, or Student Conservation Association, and a big part of what we do was also habitat management and restoration, and buckthorn was a huge critical plant that we had to manage and control. And we would usually use like pairs of loppers that we would chop down like small saplings. But some of the bigger trees or shrubs, we would actually use hand saws to be able to cut them down, and then apply some herbicide on top to prevent more from sprouting. So there's definitely a lot of ways that you can get involved with your local jurisdiction if you're interested with controlling buckthorn.
I agree with everything that you guys said so far, and I haven't personally volunteered with getting rid of buckthorn, but I remember at least volunteering getting rid of garlic mustard, which is also another invasive plant in Wisconsin, and like it was fascinating how they taught us about the reproductive strategy of garlic mustard, because apparently the strategy is that even though you pull the plant itself, those seeds can still disperse, and they go through a 3-year cycle.
That is a very good point in terms of buckthorn too, that sometimes just cutting down the buckthorn isn't going to solve the problem. Like like they often have such developed roots.
They can spread, they can shoot up, they spread multiple shoots if you don't actually kill it.
You have runner shoots. So I know, at my grandparents' house, I've been cutting buckthorn. We've been fighting buckthorn since I was like 4 years old. We just go out with the loppers for fun and cut down some buckthorn. But it'll just keep. You really need to use herbicides. Is like a very important part of controlling buckthorn, because if you just cut down the tree, especially like in the fall or something, they have enough. They just go into their roots. Their roots are, they just store the nutrients in the roots, and they'll just send up more shoots. So it's definitely a big battle. It is not easy to control buckthorn.
And I think everybody who's listening to the podcast right now, could agree, with all invasives, including buckthorn, that once they establish, they're not going to go away. And I don't want to discourage anybody to not volunteer in their local community to help fight invasives, but don't have the mindset of thinking that you're going to minimize or destroy everything.
Well, I think it is. You will minimize. See, I think that is the thing. In a local site, it can be extremely important. In the small, of course, yes, we'll be fighting buckthorn and all these other invasive species. It's an uphill battle for sure that we'll never probably win, for sure. But they definitely can have big impacts for local populations of, especially birds and stuff. You can there's a prairie. I wish I had seen the whole restoration project, but there is a forest preserve near my house that essentially used to be completely covered in buckthorn. And then over the course of probably, I don't know, I would guess at least 10, 15 years, they've cleared out this whole, turned it into a prairie. And now there's 5 different species of milkweed, green comet milkweed, which isn't, super common in Cook County. It's also on the site of a dolomite. It's a dolomite prairie. So it's a very important and unique site in Illinois. And okay, this might be a little off topic, but just getting rid of buckthorn can be extremely important, especially at sensitive sites, where the seed bank now, Quinn mentioned, when the buckthorn is there won't be nothing grows there. And buckthorn has chemicals in their leaves that actually can alter the chemical makeup of the soil. So it makes it easier for the buckthorn to grow, and it kind of kills. I don't know. We might be running out of time, but
they also seem every time I've always noticed too. They're always the first plants to be green too.
Yeah, that is
they're
very
always
true.
I feel
the first and the last.
They have a competitive advantage over all our native species, because they'll be the first ones green in the spring, and then the last ones to turn brown and fall off and die. So they're able to accumulate way more energy and biomass than our native species can.
The entire growing season in some really thick established buckthorn stands, it's you're standing in a dark room sometimes.
Yeah,
It's
it
like-
really is. Especially if you've got like some grape or something going over the canopy, you know? That's one thing you do see, and I think that maybe the birds do like the grapes more than the buckthorn. But anyways, yeah. But after you get rid of the buckthorn, you know, the seed bank can still be there. So there is a chance, I mean, if depending how old it is, and also it's very useful to like seed it with additional seeds, but oftentimes, like, you know, garlic mustard actually is a good example that their seeds can lie dormant in the ground for like over 10 years and still be viable. So a lot of these, even like native plants, if you remove the buckthorn and then can keep fighting it, you know, and give all these other plants a chance to come up, you know, you can.
Nature almost has a way of rebounding once it's in
Yeah.
control. From what you guys have described, you know,
I mean, yeah.
the battle
Mm-hmm.
can never be won, or the
No.
war, but you
gotta
can
keep it up.
if you control it,
manage it.
nature
You
can
have to
come back.
manage
Yeah,
it.
those
Because
fragile
I do hate to say, like, what Graham was saying about, like, the competitive advantage. I do kind of agree. You, like, if you're just going by the survival of the fittest, like, in some ways you could say, like, the apex, like, you know, like how the, what's the climate, you know, not climate, but the habitat book. The one they gave us at Tree
that
Haven.
Kotar?
Yeah, Kotar's habitat
Yes.
book, you know. I feel like in some prairie situations, you could almost argue that if you depending where, you know, if it's a wet prairie, buckthorn can absolutely, if you let it, it'll just keep coming back. But you just have to keep managing it.
And can I also add something that I'm learning in my habitat management class right now? And I mean, Grant is actually in my habitat management class too, and he can back me up. A few weeks ago, we were learning about grazing, and one of the articles that we read was talking about how there's so many more aspects to plants that we can understand. Like, you're not just being a wildlife habitat manager, you're like learning about their plants biology and like what gear you have to like apply grazing and like what defenses the plants are using to fight off grazers too. There's so many aspects to plants that we give credit for and would be very helpful in fighting species like buckthorn.
Amazing. Very excellent commentary, guys. Like I said, we're about to approach the 25-minute mark, but it seems like you guys have hit some solid points. Again, for the listeners, you know, the purpose of this podcast is to inspire action. And from, you know, what these experienced guests have shared is that, you know, I hate to say it, it seems like we're never truly going to get rid of buckthorn, but when we get rid of it in sensitive areas, our, you know, precious native habitat that we all strive to conserve can come back. We can really work bringing it back. And, I want to say, you know, thank all of you guys for sharing your advice and coming on. Do you have any closing remarks or?
I mean, I tell you, it's not in vain. I think, like, especially, like you said, sensitive habitats and just, you know, it does make a difference for sure. And just, it makes it so much prettier when you can, like, actually just, like, see, like, oh my gosh, it's so open, like, compared to just, like, you know.
Yeah, every
A wall of green,
wall.
a
It's-
perpetual hedge that never ends.
Yeah.
like every time like I always felt a sense of accomplishment every time I cleared like a whole section.
It's fun.
It's like, wow, I really made a difference because
Yeah,
you think
I can relate.
when you first see it, all the buckthorn, you're like, oh man, we gotta do this. That's gonna be a lot. But once you actually do it, you're like,
It is very.
you feel proud of yourself.
It's very
and
rewarding. I think
working
it's just
with your
fun.
crew and getting all the
Uh-huh.
buckthorn down, and then you get to plant more native shrubs and vegetation, and the birds and all the other native plants start growing back. It's just
increase biodiversity on all
exactly like everything in the ecosystem gets the benefit once you manage it effectively.
There's something just so aesthetically pleasing about nature itself, like especially like when you see diversity in the ecosystem, not with just plants but with animals and vertebrates, like even like the rocks and like the soil, everything is connected in some way. But when you see a wall of buckthorn, it's bland.
It's icky.
Yeah, it's like something's not right. It's out of balance, and that's what we're trying to fix as wildlife managers, I would say.
I agree.
Establishing balance is definitely a good way to put it. Well, you've heard it right there, folks. You can take action, find a place to start removing buckthorn locally, protect your local sensitive habitats, and I'll leave you with that. I'm Alex Myers, UWSP, NRES 478, signing off. Thank you.